And welcome. I'm so glad to see that so many of you have braved the harsh elements to be here this evening for tonight's program. My name is John Downey, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Student Development in Richmond College. In a moment, I'll introduce two students who will in turn introduce our guest, Dr. Michael Kimmel. Before I do so, I just want to have two general announcements. First of all, there should be no audio taping of tonight's program. We are videotaping the program, but that should be the only tape that is running in tonight's performance. The other announcement is that Dr. Kimmel will take some questions at the end of his lecture, and we have two microphones that are set up to help that process. I also want to thank some various organizations and offices sponsoring this event. Tonight's program has been co-sponsored by the Richmond College Dean's Office, West Hampton College Dean's Office, the Women Involved in Living and Learning Program, the President's Office, the Office of the Provost, and the Department of Sociology. Without the collaboration and support of each of these organizations, programs such as this would not be possible. So thank you. I also want to give a personal note of thanks to Holly Blake, the coordinator of the Women Involved in Living and Learning Program, who is my counterpart and who has worked very hard to help bring Dr. Kimmel to campus. So thank you, Holly. Now let me introduce the students who will tell you a little about tonight's speaker. Gargi Bahuja is a senior with a double major in biology and women's studies. She's been on the executive board of the WIL program for 3 years, and she currently serves as the senior class representative. Gargi also serves as the training coordinator for Stealing Home, a sexual assault awareness group, and plans to pursue graduate work in public health administration following graduation from Richmond. Eventually, she wants to work to reform the United States healthcare system, and I wish her lots of luck. Dustin Minoshi is a sophomore with a double major in political science and business administration. He's a member of student government, the debate team, and Alpha Kappa Psi, a co-ed business fraternity. His academic interests include the study of gender, particularly the social construction of masculinity. Gargi and Dustin, thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for that wonderful introduction. Before I begin, I would like to thank Will and Holly Blake, the WIL coordinator, for helping to bring Michael Kimmel here today. Thank you, Holly.
I'd also like to take an opportunity to thank John Downey for his efforts to bring Michael Kimmel here today, as well as his dedication and support for this type of programming. And now to our speaker.
Michael Kimmel asserts that the critical issues facing men in the 1990s, issues involving health, relationships with women, children, and other men, will push men to clearly define who they are and who they can be. Men have a lot of work to do if they're going to change the definition of masculinity and become eloquent listeners, compassionate lovers, better friends, and fathers. Michael Kimmel, in his professional career and personal life, has sought to help inform and understand the issues facing men and how to address them in this drastically changing world. He has worked to understand the history behind masculinity and men in America and relates those experiences to helping men and women find more gender equality.
Michael Kimmel has received international acclaim for his work on men and masculinity. He is widely published in scholarly journals and is also the editor of several publications, including Masculinities, Interdisciplinary Studies on Gender. In addition, Dr. Kimmel has been featured as a pro-feminist perspective in the Wall Street Journal, Vogue, and the Washington Post. He's also been a featured guest on shows including Crossfire and Donahue. Michael Kimmel was a member of the first class of men to graduate from Vassar College, where his interest in gender began. He received his PhD in sociology from UC Berkeley and has since taught at UC Santa Cruz, Rutgers, NYU, and the State University of New York at Stony Brook, where he currently teaches.
In addition to Michael Kimmel's academic work, he has been actively involved in fighting sex discrimination. He has held countless workshops across the United States on issues such as date rape, sexual harassment, and combating homophobia. He is also the national spokesperson for NOMAS, the National Organization for Men Against Sexism. He has served as an expert witness for the U.S. Department of Justice on cases in sex discrimination. Michael Kimmel believes that men have just as much responsibility in achieving gender equality as women do. To cite from a recent article, to support feminism requires only that one share an empirical observation that men and women are not equal in our society and have the moral position that they should be.
We hope that tonight's event will teach us further about masculinity and how we relate to each other. Please helping me in giving Michael Kimmel a warm welcome to the University of Richmond.
Thank you, Gargi and Dustin, for that lovely introduction. I think it's form and content also. To watch them go back and forth like that is, to me, an example of the best that University of Richmond's coordinate system gives us. But before I finish thanking them, I hope, Gargi, that as you reform the U.S. healthcare system, I would just ask you to consider one question before you do that: is, do we have a U.S. healthcare system? Maybe we should get one before you reform it. Maybe you could be part of the getting one part. I'd also like to thank John Downey and Holly Blake for all of their work in not only in bringing me here, for which I'm of course personally grateful, but also I think for working so hard to raise issues of gender awareness for both women and men here at Richmond. I think that it's really quite an extraordinary opportunity that you all have, and I think that you're taking it in ways that are extremely creative. So I really do thank you for your work here. Let me tell you a little bit about what I'm going to do tonight. This is not my first visit to the University of Richmond. In fact, it's my third. Each time I come, I think there are some new elements that I want to add to the kinds of issues that I want to raise. So I want to talk a little bit about the title of my talk, which is, of course, I'm going to do this sort of standard academic thing. I'm going to change the title of my talk before I even start. So I'll give you a little history of it. About 5 years ago or so, close to 4.5 years ago, like many of you, I sat in front of a TV set, completely glued to watching the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings. And right after that, right after those hearings, I thought, well, gee, this is really important issues, this issue of sexual harassment, and we'd not really taken it on before. So I sat down and I wrote a little op-ed piece called Clarence and Us. And that piece was trying to say, okay, guys, this issue has now been put before us, we have to take it on, let's take on this issue of sexual harassment. So if you remember, those of you who remember the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings may remember the way the media responded to the hearings once they were over. After the truly shameful way that the Senate Judiciary Committee had treated Anita Hill, the media had one phrase. Anybody remember it? It was a phrase that they all used to describe what was going to happen after the Thomas confirmation hearing. That phrase was a chilling effect. You remember this phrase now? A chilling effect. After the way they treated Anita Hill, women are going to be less likely to come forward to speak about sexual harassment. They are going to be less likely to come forward and talk about the issues that they have faced in the workplace and in relationships. And so I'd ask you to consider for a minute the following question: have the media ever been more wrong? Not only hasn't there been a chilling effect, but there's kind of been a national thaw. Women have been coming forward in unprecedented numbers, and they have not stopped. So ever since then, every month or so, there's a new name of some new guy in a list of men who've done sort of, stupid, disgusting, heinous things to women, and now we have to deal with them. And so I wrote that op-ed piece, Clarence and Us. And I think the first time I ever came to Richmond, the second time I came to Richmond, I think probably if I had a mental picture of the talk I gave, it was something like Clarence, William, Iron Mike, Magic, and Us. For those of you who don't know who William was, that was William Kennedy Smith. He was acquitted, and so people don't remember him. But I think also people don't remember him because he was white and a Kennedy. But I think part of this is that by the time I came here, a couple of years ago, there were a few more names on the list. Tonight's talk it should be titled something like Clarence, William, Iron Mike, Magic, Woody, Tailhook, Spur Posse, Senator Packwood, Citadel, John Wayne Bobbitt, O.J. the Million Man March, and Us. Now, I think if we add one more name to this, I'm not going to be able to get through it without taking a breath in the middle. Now, this gives you an idea that there's something going on. that we have been witnessing over the past several years a steady parade of men who signify to us something that has gone wrong in gender relations. Something about, each of these names, for example, might mean something about sexual harassment, date and acquaintance rape, assault, sort of group assault, the spur posse, male bonding kind of run amok. These are the kinds of issues that I think have been constantly put before us. And so what I want to do today is I want to think about those issues together. I want to talk about how come that steady parade of men's names has constantly been coming before us. And in fact, how I think that probably by the time this year is up, there'll probably be another name or two that we'll have added to the list. Now, in order to do that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at the ways in which our lives, in which gender relations, in which gender has changed over the past, say, 20 or 30 years. And in order to do that, I think that Gargi and Dustin were gracious enough to mention that I teach sociology, and those of you who've taken sociology courses know that, we feel most comfortable when we're dealing with data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start tonight by reading you some results of a survey. 2 surveys, in fact, that were done in 1970 and 1990. Now, these surveys were done by the Roper organization, and they were done of 3,000 American women. And what they asked these women in 1970 and 1990 was, what do you think, questions about men, what do you think about men? And so what you'll hear, of course, are the differences between 1970 and now in these women's perceptions. Here's what they asked and here's what they found. 1970, 2/3 of the women agreed men are basically kind and considerate. In 1990, 48% agreed. 1970, they asked women, is it true that all a man wants from a date is to go to bed? 1970, 41% thought so. 1990, 54% thought so. 1970, 42% of the women believed that men were basically selfish and interested only in their own opinions. In 1990, 58% thought so. By now you should be picking up a trend here. In 1970, 49% of the women believed that men's egos require that they put women down. In 1990, 55% thought so. And finally, in 1970, 39% of the women believed that men were really basically only interested in their families. Only interested in their careers, not at all interested in their families. 39%. 1990, after 2 decades of the fatherhood revolution, after the Cosby Show, 54% of the women surveyed thought that men were only interested in their careers, not interested in their family. An increase of 15%. So what do you make of this? Could it be that men were doing worse in 1990 than we were doing in 1970? Some of you are already starting to shake your I don't think so. I don't think the answer to that is that men were doing worse than we were in 1970. I think rather the real change on the landscape is that women had changed so much in those 20 years that their expectations had changed quite dramatically. Their expectations about men had changed so fundamentally that it looked like men were doing worse. What had really changed is women's lives. And I think that's the place where I want to start. To talk about men's lives means, in a way, to talk about the ways in which women's lives have changed. That's part of the issue that I think we have to talk about. And if we're going to talk about feminism and its impact on men, which is something that I do want to talk about, we have to understand that feminism is not just about women, but feminism is about gender. And if we're going to talk about the changes between women and men, the place to start is the changes in women's lives. So what I'm going to do for a minute is point to 4 areas in which women's lives have changed, and then suggest to you the ways in which those affect us as men. So 4 areas of change in women's lives, and then again, this is what raised the expectations, which is why it looked like we were doing worse. The first area of change in women's lives is women made gender visible. We now know this. Gender is one of the fundamental basic building blocks of our identity. Women made that visible. Women said it was gender that mattered. It's only in the past 30 years that we have figured this out, that gender is one of the axes around which social life revolves. 30 years ago, we didn't know that. It was the pioneering work of women that put that on the map. Every university now, virtually every single school in the country has a women's studies program or women's studies courses. There are even, I was surprised at first to learn that there were women's studies courses at the Citadel. There are women's studies courses at virtually every school. Women's studies lists at university presses are the largest selling sections of those university presses. They're the best-selling books at university presses. So women made gender visible. That's the first thing. Now, as I said, 30 years ago, this was not true. 30 years ago, if you wanted to study gender, and you were in social sciences, for example, what you studied was what they called, like, sociology of marriage and the family, right? That was kind of the ladies' auxiliary of the social sciences. Now, of course, you take, of course, the multicultural litany, race, class, gender. You can barely, get through your first day of college without learning race, class, gender. 30 years ago, we only knew class. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we began to figure out that race mattered. And now we know that class and race and gender all matter. They're all irreducible to one another, and they all matter. I'll give you one example from my own discipline, that's sociology. The biggest growth field in sociology in the 1940s and 1950s was studies of occupational mobility. America is the land of opportunity. You could rise as high as you want to rise, all that sort of stuff, right? How did they measure occupational mobility? Those of you who've actually looked at the great studies of mobility in the 1940s and 50s will remember this. What they did was they asked a sample of white men the following two questions. What was your father's occupation? What was your father's education? Then they would ask the white men, what's your occupation? What's your education? And from the answers to those questions, and those questions alone, they calculated American mobility patterns. They didn't want to ask women, because women kind of move in and out of the labor force. It's hard to figure out. And black people, well, if you ask them fathers and grandfathers, well, then you're ending up maybe with slaves. Are they in the workforce? It's hard to say. They didn't want to screw up the data. They wanted the data to be really clean. Therefore, they only asked white men. Now, today, you could not do a study like that. You could not say, I'm going to look at America by asking white men a couple of questions. It would be transparent. 40 years ago, that was absolutely standard. So now you see what it means to say making gender visible. The second area of change in women's lives is around the issue of the workplace. Women have entered the workplace. They are in the workplace to stay. There has been a virtual revolution about women entering the workplace. And it has taken only a couple of generations for that to happen. How many of the women in this room who are students here intend to have full-time careers outside the home when you get out of college? Let's see your hands. Now, don't put them down yet. Keep your hands raised. You tend to have full-time career outside the home. Now, keep your hands raised if your mother has or had a full-time career outside the home for at least 8 uninterrupted years. Okay. Grandmothers? Anybody? Great-grandmothers? Okay. Now, you can see here clearly in a couple of generations, virtually every hand went up when I said, how about you? Most of your hands stayed up when I said mothers. A few hands up for grandmothers, and only 2 or 3 hands right here in the front for great-grandmothers. Now, what would happen if I said to the guys, okay, guys, how many of you intend to have full-time careers outside the home when you get out of here? The question's absurd. Of course. What are you talking about? And of course, if I said your fathers and your grandfathers, we would keep going back basically until we hit the Depression. Because men's relationship to the workforce has not changed nearly in the way that women's relationship to the workforce has changed. Now, that has led to a third area of change in women's lives, and that is the relationship between work and family. Currently, women have this choice, this questioning about how to balance work and family. Remember that phrase in the late 80s, I think, could women have it all? Could they have the warm, loving, supportive families, and could they have the exciting careers that they say that they want to have? In fact, part of the problem for women has been that they can't have it all precisely because men have it all. We're the ones who have the cool careers outside the home and the warm, loving, supportive families to come home to. We have that because you all do the homework. You do the housework and childcare, so we don't have to do it. The women's inability to have it all was contingent on men having it all. That's why some of the new issues that we are facing have to do with sharing housework, sharing childcare. It used to be that women had to make a very painful choice. And I think if you don't believe me, read Katharine Hepburn's autobiography. It's quite eloquent on this. She knew she wanted to be a really big-time actress. And she knew that if she wanted to do that, she could not get married and have children. And she said to herself, I want to get married and have children, and I can't. I know I can't do it. It was a painful choice for her. She made it. She never looked back. But in some way, she said it was a very painful decision. Women today are unwilling to make that choice. And that means that men are going to have to do some stuff as well. Because women's inability to have it all has been contingent on men having it all. Fourth area of change for women, and that is sexuality. It is women's sexuality that has changed dramatically in the past 25 years. I'll talk a little bit about men's as well, but let me give you a couple of examples. Now, there's a mountain of sex research on women's sexuality, but basically it boils down to this. Women now feel entitled to pleasure. Women feel that they are able to say yes, that they can like sex, that they can want sex, that they can go for it, that they can get horny. Women, as well as men, have learned that they are entitled to pleasure. Now, I'll give you a couple of bits of data from a mountain of sex research that one could find. 1948, Alfred Kinsey published his massive study, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. A few years later, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. In that work, he found, early 1950s, he found that about 40% of women over 25 had ever masturbated. That number today is somewhere about 94%. Comparable figures for men. 1948, 96%. Today, 97%. You can see an enormous change in women's lives. Not a big change in men's lives around sexual self-pleasuring, we might call it. Another bit of data. In 20 years ago or so, sociologist Lillian Rubin did a book called Worlds of Pain. One of the things she asked the women that she talked to was how often they faked orgasm. About 30% of the women said they sometimes, or more frequently, faked orgasm. About 3 years ago, she went back and interviewed women again. Many of them the daughters of the women she had originally interviewed. This time she found that less than 1 in 10 ever faked orgasm. Now, there is no comparable data on men faking orgasm, so I can't give you a kind of baseline on that. But you get an idea just from these two little blips, and there's tons of data about this, about changes in sexuality, that it's women's sexuality that's changed dramatically. And the summary statement I would say again is that women feel entitled to say yes to their own desires, their own bodies, their own pleasures. Okay. Those are the 4 areas of change in women's lives. Now, while women's lives have been changing so dramatically, what has been happening with men? Well, not a whole lot. Men's lives have not changed nearly as dramatically as women's lives. Or I think more accurately, I would say men's lives have changed fundamentally, but we don't know it. Let me give you just let me give you a summary statement of that kind of change. My father could go to an all-male college, serve in an all-male military, and spend virtually his entire working life in an all-male working environment. Not one man in this room will be able to do that. What are you doing to prepare yourself for that completely different world? The reality is, not a whole lot. Most men have not really begun to integrate the fact that the world has completely changed. There are only 3 all-male colleges, private colleges, left in the United States: Hampton-Sydney, Wabash, and Morehouse. 2 all-male public colleges, both of which are under judicial scrutiny at this moment. So, there are fewer and fewer opportunities for that kind of life. There is no all-male military any longer, and virtually no job, no career where you will not have a woman colleague, woman coworker, or woman boss. So what's been happening with men? Not a whole lot, in a way. We have not begun to integrate the tremendous amount of changes in our lives. Basically, most men are still following the same kind of rules of masculinity that we have followed for generations, it seems. The 4 basic rules of manhood, which I'll now give you, those guys who are somewhat insecure, unsure of yourselves, if you memorize these, they're really easy. If you memorize these, follow them all the time, you'll be okay. And here they are, the 4 basic fundamental rules of American manhood. Number 1, no sissy stuff. This is the most important rule of manhood, by far. You can never do anything that even remotely hints of the feminine. Masculinity is the relentless repudiation of femininity. Okay, got that one? That's number 1. Everything else is basically an elaboration of that. That's the most important rule. Rule number 2, be a big wheel. We measure masculinity by the size of your paycheck. Well, actually we measure masculinity by the size of bulges, I think. Bulging wallets, bulging crotches, bulging biceps, anything that bulges we like. These are the markers of masculinity, it seems to me. Wealth, power, status, all of these are currencies for men, being a big wheel. 3rd rule of manhood, be a sturdy oak. What makes a man is that he's reliable in a crisis. He never shows his feeling, he never breaks down. 4th rule of manhood, give him hell. Exude an aura of daring and aggression. Always take risks. Always go for it. Those are the 4 basic rules of manhood. Now, I know that all you guys are trying real hard to exemplify all those, or in fact repudiate them as you go along. But in fact, if you follow those rules to the letter every single moment, you too can be a real man circa, say, 1955 or so. Because they have not changed really very much since then. In fact, there's really only one man in American history who fully, truly, completely, every minute exemplified those 4 rules of manhood. And that man was the man who appeared on every single American man you most admire kind of poll. Who's it? John Wayne. You all knew that. John Wayne. The only American who fought in every war in our history. Now, those of you who knew who John Wayne, that it was John Wayne, anybody remember what his real name was? Marion. Yep, Marion. Marion Michael Morrison. He goes to Hollywood in the 1930s, not to act in westerns, but to act in the genre picture of the time, gangster movies. Gets an agent, says, I want to act in gangster pictures. His agent said, not with a name like Marion, you don't. We've got to get you a manly name. We've got to change you around. We've got to get you a manly name. Okay, what could be more manly? Guys, think about this when you know what your nicknames are and all. What could be more manly than 2 first names, each of which 1 syllable? Real men don't like more than 1 syllable unless it has a Y at the end. Mickey we can deal with, right? At least being a New York boy, Mickey was all right. Duke is good. Willie, a Y or an IE is okay, but that's it, right? 2 first names. Not even John Wayne was who he pretended to be. And I don't know if you all know this about his earliest movies, but in John Wayne's earliest movies, they used to position the camera slightly below waist level, facing upward, just a little bit. Now, I'm not talking, those of you who know your cinema history, I'm not talking about Citizen Kane, where the camera was actually mounted on the floor, and for the first time in movie history, they actually used closed ceilings on the sets because the shots went so dramatically at such an angle to project Orson Welles to such a gargantuan height. I'm just talking about a little bit of an angle, enough of an angle that it made John Wayne look even bigger than his 6'4" frame. In the earliest films, in his earliest westerns, they used to construct the table and chairs in the saloon scenes to be a little bit smaller than normal. So it would look like he was just so big he couldn't even sit at a normal table and chair. So even he was in some way a fraud, not who he pretended to be. I should also mention, John Wayne doesn't even show up on the lists anymore as the people that, as the man that American men most admire. And those who try to follow in his footsteps, the Stallones, for example, are seen as cartoons rather than as real role models. Now, this gives you an idea that we are still wrestling with some old patterns of what it means to be a man. And what I want to do for the remainder of my time is I want to pair up those 4 areas of change in women's lives with those 4 rules of manhood and suggest the kind of issues in gender relations that I think we're facing today. The first issue was women made gender visible. The first rule of manhood, no sissy stuff. Now, this is an important issue, I think, because what I'm going to suggest is that although women made gender visible, gender remains relatively invisible to men. Most men don't know that gender matters to them. Most men think, when we teach courses, for example, on sociology of gender, we get 90% women. When we teach psychology of gender, when we teach psychology of women, we get 95% women. You get this one guy sitting in the corner, intro to women's studies, right? One guy sort of cowering in the corner, goes, "Please don't blame me for everything," right? At the University of Richmond, several years ago, you offered a course called The Psychology of Men. 8 students signed up, all women. I think the epigram here is real men don't study gender. Why? Because to study gender means that you don't know everything there is to know about it, which is in fact a repudiation of the very idea of masculinity. Right? So I've been thinking about this because I have this new book called Manhood in America, and I figure if a guy's seen reading this, like you wouldn't want to read this in public, right? Because people would say, "Oh, he's reading a book about how to be a man. Ha ha ha, he doesn't know everything there is to know about it. What's wrong with him?" So this is the kind of book I'm going to now sell with a different kind of cover, right? Sort of one of those, some other kind of, maybe I'll put a kind of John Grisham cover on it or something like that. The Man. There we go. There we are. That'll do it. Now, let's take a look at this invisibility for a minute, and I think this has real costs to men. When I say gender remains relatively invisible to men, it's because we know that gender matters, but men don't know that gender matters to them as men. Let me illustrate this. I've suggested this before, and people may be familiar with this in some of my other work, but I think it's a useful heuristic device in my own development to refer back to this experience that I myself had. I was in a seminar several years ago when I was teaching at UC Santa Cruz. And in this seminar, it was a seminar on sort of feminist theory circa 1980 or so. And in the seminar, we were talking about sort of the great feminist works of the time. And there were 12 women and myself in the group. Now, having been in the first class that had men at Vassar, this was not that unfamiliar to me to be virtually the only man in a group. But one time in that seminar, I witnessed a conversation between a white woman and a black woman that changed my experience of this. The white woman was talking about how all women experience patriarchy, experience sexism in a similar way. All women are equally oppressed, in a sense, by patriarchy. All women were, in a sense, sisters. And the black woman said, "I don't know. Let me ask you a question." The black woman says to the white woman, "When you wake up in the morning and you look in a mirror, what do you see?" And the white woman said, "I see a woman." And the black woman said, "You see, to me, that's the problem. Because when I wake up in the morning and I look in a mirror," the black woman said, "I see a black woman. To me, race is visible. But to you, race was invisible. You didn't see it. That's how privilege works," she said. Privilege keeps the terms of your privilege invisible to you. It is a luxury not to have to think about race every second of your life. It frees your time to think about other things. It's a privilege to have race be invisible to you. Everybody sort of sat around going, wow, yeah, that's interesting. I, of course, went, oh, no, like that. Somebody said, what was that about? And I said, well, see, when I wake up in the morning and I look in a mirror, I see a human being. I'm a middle-class white man. I'm the generic person. I'm every man, you know. I'm universally generalizable, right? I have no class, no race, no gender. And now, in retrospect, I like to think that that was the moment that I became a middle-class white man. That class and race and gender weren't about other people, they were about me as well. Now, what are the costs to men of not having gender be visible? That's how privilege works for us. We men are privileged that we don't think about gender, that we don't think it matters to us. Just as white people are privileged that they don't think about race. So I think that that's part of it. Now, part of the issue, though, is as long as we keep gender invisible, we make masculinity a kind of relentless test, that we always have to be proving it, that it's always up for grabs, that it could at any moment be undone. Masculinity then becomes something that we always have to prove precisely because it's invisible. If we had some kind of mechanism by which young guys could go through some kind of little initiation of some kind or something like that, or some ritual, and sort of, you didn't have to worry about it. Imagine, guys, life without identity crises. Life without anybody ever being able to say, you're not a real man. Of course you are. I went through my thing. I'm done. Imagine life like that. Now, I think this fear of not being seen as a man starts very, very early in our lives. It starts when we're little boys. I have a bet with a friend that I could walk onto a playground anywhere in Richmond. Well, not today, of course. There are no playgrounds, no schools open, and you were so kind to, even my hometown paper says, deep freeze grips southern states. How hospitable the South. But think, just imagine a playground when it's nicer here. A playground where there's a bunch of 5 or 6-year-old boys happily playing together. I'd be willing to bet I could start a fight by walking on the playground and asking one question. Who's a sissy around here? Right? You know what's going to happen. One of two things is going to happen, right? Two guys are going to go at it. He is. No, he is. No, he is. No, he is. Or a whole bunch of them are going to go, he is, he is, he is. And that little boy is either going to have to fight them all, or he's going to run home crying, kind of proving their point. And it starts very early, but it doesn't end there. I wish I could tell you that, sort of ends by the time you get out of high school, but it doesn't. Imagine, for example, now just relax for a second, conjure up in your mind, here at University of Richmond, the guy you know who has absolutely no problems at all with his masculinity, Mr. Confident. The guy who is absolutely unshakable. He knows he's a man. He doesn't have to prove it at all. He's completely confident about it. Now, I'll bet some of you are actually thinking of the same person. But let's imagine he's not in the room. Okay? Because if he were that confident, he could be seen reading a book. He could be seen coming to a lecture on men, because it wouldn't in any way detract from his masculinity. Now, Mr. Confident walks into the room, and I say, hey, John, check out that wimp. And Dustin says, yeah, what a pussy. And John says, yeah, faggot. Now, what's Mr. Confident doing? Suddenly, we're in a scene from Taxi Driver. You talking to me? You talking to me? In a second, we could call him out, question his masculinity. Suddenly he has to prove it all over again. We're going to have a fight. Or we could. Now that's the most confident guy you know. Imagine what it's like for the rest of us poor jerks. It is not an easy thing. And let me tell you, it doesn't end when you get your BA degree. It doesn't end throughout your professional career. One of the great moments in the history of American masculinity occurred several years ago at the Academy Awards, when Jack Palance got the best supporting actor award, remember, for City Slickers? He comes onto the podium. He comes up to the podium, picks up the Oscar and says, he's 73 years old at the time. He says, a lot of producers thought, I was just washed up and couldn't do it anymore, and I'm really glad to get this award because it really shows that I can, I still have it. Puts the Oscar down, drops to the set of the stage, does a set of one-armed push-ups, gets back up, picks up the Oscar and says, and I can still get it up. And I thought to myself, geez, when does it end? When do you get to sit back, kick back, and relax, and not have to prove it all the time? And my friend said, never. So the question is that without some kind of sense about how we make masculinity visible to men, allow young men to feel safe, secure, and confident in themselves as men, we are going to have this idea of this relentless test, this constant effort to prove ourselves all the time. Now this, in our era, becomes increasingly perilous, because the ways in which we have proved it in the past are becoming more and more difficult for us in the present. Let me move to the second area of change for women and the second rule of manhood. Changes in the workplace, be a big wheel. See how they fit together? Being a big wheel for men has always been a major way we've proved our manhood, as breadwinners, as providers, being successful in the workplace. Now, this is difficult for us for several reasons. This is increasingly difficult for us for several reasons. One of those reasons is it's harder and harder to be a big wheel these days. We are now in a downwardly mobile economy. I know sometimes that y'all don't like to hear this sort of stuff, and I sometimes don't like to be the bearer of bad news, but there is a part of me that gets a perverse kind of pleasure out of telling you this. If you were brought up in any major metropolitan area suburb in a private home, you have lived in the nicest house you will ever live in. You will never be as successful as your parents were at the same age as you. Never in your occupational career. This is on the average. Some of you will. Don't get that nervous. Drop out yet. But there are fewer and fewer big wheels out there. More and more big wheels are in jail. And the possibilities for being a big wheel are increasingly tenuous. If you look at the data, it's pretty clear that this generation will never be as successful as their parents were at the same age, all through their working careers. So, men who have always historically expressed and proved their manhood in the workplace as providers, as successes, as big wheels, are facing already an uncertain economic picture. And now here come women into the workplace in unprecedented numbers, and they're not going away. You may remember that the Secretary of Commerce under Bush proposed that if only women would leave the labor force, we'd have zero unemployment. I'll let you think about that for a minute. We'd have no unemployment. So this is, I think, the sociological context in which we have to put issues of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is not simply the behavior of an isolated individual man versus an isolated and individual woman. It's a context in which men, as a group, make the workplace inhospitable to women. That's what the hostile environment is about. It's a way of saying to women, you may be in the workforce, but you're still just women. You don't really belong here. This is still our arena. We will put up pin-ups, we will make some kinds of jokes, we will do all kinds of things to make you feel uncomfortable so you know you don't really belong here. That's the context I think we have to understand sexual harassment in. Not simply the quid pro quo issues of, sex for grades or promotions or things like that. Rather, it is a context in which women in the workplace are seen as just women, not seen as colleagues, co-workers, or bosses who happen to be women. Now this, I think, raises an issue for men. How are we going to respond to this? I think that we go about it all wrong when we think about, well, we lose guys, okay, they're here, let's give up. Or let's fight them, the kind of men's rights argument. We're the victims of reverse discrimination, let's get back at the women. I think, in fact, that we should be supporting women's efforts to end sexual harassment in the workplace. First of all, I mean, there's sort of the obvious sort of it's right and good and just and all of that. But secondly, if you're a manager, you want all your employees to be at their best. We know that corporations lose an enormous amount in terms of absenteeism, reduced work ability, increased transfers, sick time, all kinds of things because of sexual harassment. You want your workers to be at their best, which means you want to provide not only an even playing field, but a safe playing field. One in which women and men can all put out their best, because their best makes you look better. Now that's if you're a manager as well. Now I'm sure that many of you are planning for careers in management, so there's an incentive for you. You want to support women's efforts to end sexual harassment. More than that, it seems to me, there's also the question of dating in the workplace. Now it seems to me that one of the things we guys want, I think, is we want to know that when women hang out with us, they want to be with us. They choose to be with us because of the enormously fabulous characteristics that we ourselves embody. Because we're so cool and we're so nice and we're so great that of course they want to be with us. Now if you're a male manager or a professor or something like that, and you're with a student or a subordinate, you'll never ever be sure that the reason that she's there is because she wants to be with you. She could be there because she's afraid not to be, because she thinks she's going to get promoted or a good grade, or that she'll get fired or she won't get a good grade. So if you want to be with women who want to be with you, the answer is to support women's efforts to end sexual harassment. It's a very easy thing. It is in men's interest to support feminist efforts to end sexual harassment, not against it. And I think that part of the theme, now I'm going to introduce this new theme, which I will continue for the rest of my time talking with you, is that it is not an opposition between women and men. That in fact, if you listen carefully to what feminism promises, it actually promises men all manner of opportunity as well as to women. This is the first area. To have women and men working at their best in the workplace, to have the women and men who are dating one another, who happen to find themselves in the same workplace, who are dating one another, not afraid that the reason that they're there is because of some extraneous reason, but rather because of the terrifically studly qualities that we embody. Now, that leads to the third area, and that is the balance between work and family. And here there are several issues that we men are facing constantly. One of the things that unites men all across the country is issues around fatherhood. We say with almost one voice, we want to be better fathers to our sons than our fathers were to us. This is true regardless of race, class, region of the country, ethnicity, doesn't matter. Men across the country are saying the same thing. We want to be good fathers. Now, what do you do to be a good father? Remember the third rule of manhood. Be a sturdy oak. Never show your feelings. Reliability means absolutely like a rock, impervious, never vulnerable. So the very qualities that make for nurturing, attention to process, patience, are exactly the qualities that we think will make us less like real men. So the very thing we want, to be good fathers, to be good friends to other men, to be good friends with women, to have good relations with our children, these are the very things that are made more difficult by what we thought would make us real men. Alan Alda once said, a man isn't someone you'd want to have around in a crisis, like raising children or growing old together. The idea is that this imperviousness is exactly what we thought would make us manly, and it's exactly what keeps us from being really involved fathers and really caring husbands and partners. So this is part of, now this is the carrot. Of course the stick is women need desperately for us to share housework and childcare. If they're going to have the kind of career life and family life that they want, they need us to do this. On the other hand, there's a carrot here. We want this. We want these relationships with our children. We want these relationships with our partners. So this is an invitation for men to consider what it means to be nurturing, to be caring, to be loving. Now, I think, frankly, how should I put this? In the past several years, I've become an advocate of what I call quantity time, not quality time. I don't think nurturing is throwing a pass with Junior on a Saturday afternoon during halftime. I think nurturing is putting in the long, invisible hours, doing the things that nobody writes books about, nobody heralds, nobody thinks is a terrific thing. Basically, holding someone when they're sick, doing the laundry, doing the ironing, all those boring things that you have to do routinely over and over and over again. In fact, nurture is a series of routines. Anybody can do them. Even men can do this sort of stuff. And I think we learn how to do this not by running off into the woods and chanting and drumming and stuff. I don't think that makes us better nurturers. That, a lot of guys go off and do that to do what they call healing the father wound. I think what we have to do is heal the mother wound. We have constructed an idea of masculinity as the relentless flight from the feminine. What we have to do is go back and ask the people who are the nurturers in our society, hey, how do you do that? I need to learn how to do this stuff too. So we need to heal the mother wound. We need to come back home and learn how to do the very practices of nurturing. It's not some mystical thing that you get sort of as received wisdom off in the woods. It's a set of practices, as we sociologists like to say. It's things that people do. And anyone, male or female, can learn to do them. If we want to live the kind of lives we say we want to live, caring, devoted friends, loving, attentive, nurturing fathers, and truly equal partners with our wives, then we will want to do them. Our wives are saying to us, you have to do it. More than helping out, more than pitching in. Those are the phrases that we currently use. Pitch in and help out. More than that, you have to share it. But we men are feeling that we want to do that as well. We have to figure out a way to do that, of course, that won't make us feel like wimps. Fourth area of change, fourth rule of manhood. You've been all very patient, and so I figure I'll give you at the end, I'll give you the sex payoff. The part I didn't give the fathers and daughters. Remember, the fourth rule of manhood is give them hell. Always go for it. Always take risks. Always live life in the fast lane out on the edge. And the fourth area of change for women is sexuality. Now, what I want to talk about here are two issues that I think we're currently facing on every college campus in the country. And I want to talk about the links between them. And those issues are AIDS and date and acquaintance rape. Now, most of the time, we don't think that AIDS and date and acquaintance rape have anything to do with one another. I think they have everything to do with one another. And so what I want to do is I want to show you how I think we can talk about the difference, the links between them. Let me talk about AIDS first. You've probably, on your first week on campus, got some brochure from the health department, the health center here, about how not to get AIDS, and you do various things, you don't do various things, and therefore you will reduce your risk. And what is the umbrella term under which all of that falls? Not just say no. It's called safe sex, right? Safe sex means don't do certain things, do some things only with condoms, don't exchange body fluids. You know the routine, right? Safe sex is a way to reduce your risk for AIDS. Now, what's the problem with the idea of safe sex? To men, the idea of safe sex is an oxymoron. You all know what an oxymoron is. It's a phrase where the two terms cancel each other out, like business ethics. I'm in the business school, right? Military intelligence, jumbo shrimp. And I have to say this because I have to say this because of my own profession, social science. Safe sex to men is an oxymoron. What's sexy is hot. What's safe is warm. What's sexy is passionate, impulsive, explosive. What's safe is soft, sweet, cuddly. Have you ever heard more detumescent words in your life? I mean, this is what's safe. Safety is the absolute repudiation of sexiness. So, and in some way, asking men to practice safe sex is like asking men to stop having sex like men, which is why it has been so difficult for heterosexual women to get heterosexual men to wear condoms. Because it asks them to be responsible. How can you be responsible when in the passion of the moment everything flies away? The passion of the moment, you lose all your sense of responsibility. We're being irresponsible now. And in fact, what safe sex campaigns do is they frequently invite men, heterosexual men, to stop having sex like men. And here I think our homophobia gets in the way. Because if you look at the way the gay male community has responded to the AIDS crisis, they have taken this issue and addressed it head on. How to have safe, sexy sex. They have hot safe sex videos. They have hot safe sex seminars. All kinds of things that say, look, we have to make safe sex sexy. Unless you do that, you won't be able to get men to think about it. You won't be able to get men to act sexually responsible. Now this, of course, just at the moment when women are saying yes to their own desires, when women are saying yes to their own capacity for pleasure. That's the difference between men's sexuality and women's sexuality. Is safety is a precondition for women being able to say yes to their own desire and pleasure. Unless, and this is the link, I think, that word safety, is the link between AIDS awareness and preventing date and acquaintance rape. Because date and acquaintance rape is also, women have now the right, the entitlement to say yes, but only when they are certain in the core of their being that no means no. Only when women are sure that no means no can women say yes to their own desire. What do I want to, okay, now I know I'm safe here. Now, what do I want to do? What do I want him to do? What do I want to do to him? Only when women feel safe can they give voice to their own desire. So safety is a precondition of women's entitlement to pleasure. Just at the moment, remember that, and this is again part of the issue around AIDS awareness, is practicing safe sex. The idea of safety. Now guys, think about this for a minute. You want to be with women who are as hot and passionate and sexy as you are. And now you know they feel entitled to it. So here's a place where men have every reason to support women's efforts to end date and acquaintance rape. You want them to be completely certain that you understand that no means no. Because only when they know that can they be as passionate and sexy and exciting as they feel entitled to be and as you feel you are. If you want women to be sort of hot, passionate, exciting, you want to make it absolutely certain that you understand that no means no. This is the link, I think, between date and acquaintance rape on the one hand, in which safety is a precondition for pleasure, and safe sex, in which safety is a precondition for pleasure. Safety, therefore, part of our work is, part of our gender communication, it seems to me, is to eroticize safety, is to make safety as exciting to men as daring was or has been in our lives. This is not an easy task. This is a task that will take us a long time, and it requires that women remain as passionate and as convinced and consistent as they have been over the past 25 years. And it also invites us as men to begin to open up these issues ourselves, to begin to open up these issues in talking with one another. When I was doing the research for one of my books, I did a book on men who supported feminism, and contrary to what you might think, it was actually a rather fat book, not a thin one at all. And one of the things I found was that Susan B. Anthony, when she was on the lecture circuit all the time, used to have this little fragment of a poem with her by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And the poem, Aurora Lee, the fragment that she had from that poem, was where basically said something like, it was written about, well, let our work let both of our work make our personal life so much more rich. And let the richness of our personal life make our work so much more exciting. It was about that link between the two. And I found that really inspiring, that she used to carry that fragment with her. It was kind of like carrying her marriage with her when she was out on the lecture stump, because she felt like inspired and supported at home. So I went and read the poem, and in Aurora Leigh, Browning has one phrase, another two words, this is not an oxymoron, one phrase that I think describes the possibilities for men at the turn of the century. And that is, she said, possible heroes. All men, I would say, are possible heroes. Thanks very much.